A journey into the unknown. The sea stretched endlessly before them, shimmering under the pale moonlight. The crew of the Silver Crest had embarked on what was supposed to be a routine voyage across the Atlantic. Captain Elias stood at the helm, his steady hands gripping the worn wheel of the ship. The waves whispered softly against the hull, and the night was eerily still. Despite the tranquility, an unease settled among the sailors. Strange occurrences had begun from the moment they left the harbor. Missing tools, flickering lanterns, and an odd feeling of being watched. Yet, no one spoke of it, brushing the thoughts away as mere superstition. But as they ventured further from the coast, the air grew heavy with something unseen, something lurking beneath the surface. The sky was an endless stretch of black, the stars twinkling faintly as though reluctant to shine over this forsaken part of the ocean. Elias felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon his shoulders. He had been a sailor for years, but something about this journey felt different. There was no logical reason to fear, yet even he could not deny the sense of foreboding that had crept into his bones. The men worked in silence, their usual chatter and laughter now absent. Even the cook, an old man with a habit of humming cheerful tunes, had stopped his melodies. There was an unspoken agreement among them all. Something was wrong, but no one dared acknowledge it. Superstition was a powerful thing at sea, and none wanted to be the one to give voice to their fears. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the wind suddenly died. The sails hung limp, and the ship drifted listlessly. The crew gathered on deck, whispering among themselves. "Dead calm," one of them muttered. "Bad omen." Elias tried to reassure them. "It's nothing but nature," he said. "The wind will return soon." But even he was unsure of his own words. The sea stretched out in every direction, like an unbroken sheet of glass. It was unnatural. That night, as the crew lay in their bunks, the whispers began. They were soft at first, like the rustling of fabric or the distant sound of wind through trees. But there was no wind, and the whispers did not come from the men. They drifted through the air, unintelligible yet strangely melodic, a language that no one could understand. Samuel, the youngest deckhand, clutched his blanket tightly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to his bunkmate. "Go to sleep, Sam," the older sailor grumbled, turning away. But Samuel could not sleep. The whispers called to him, beckoning, lulling him into something he could not resist. And as the night stretched on, the darkness seemed to close in around the Silver Crest, trapping them in an eerie stillness that felt far too alive. By dawn, Samuel was gone. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the ship, but it did little to lift the heavy silence that had fallen upon the crew. Samuel was nowhere to be found. His bunk was empty, the sheets rumpled as though he had left in a hurry. His boots remained by his bed, untouched. Captain Elias stood by the railing, his brow furrowed. He had seen many things at sea, storms, mutinies, even shipwrecks, but this was something else. A man did not simply vanish without a trace. The crew searched every inch of the Silver Crest. They checked the lower decks, the storage rooms, even the supply crates. But there was no sign of him. It was as if he had never been there at all. "Maybe he fell overboard," one sailor suggested hesitantly. Elias shook his head. "No. The sea was calm all night. We would have heard something." A nervous murmur passed through the men. The whispers from the night before still lingered in their minds. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the thought was there. Something unnatural had taken Samuel. That evening, as the sky darkened, Elias gathered the crew on deck. "We will keep watch tonight," he said firmly. "If anyone hears or sees anything strange, report it immediately." The men nodded, though fear flickered in their eyes. As the night deepened, They took turns keeping watch, lanterns glowing softly in the darkness. The ship creaked, the waves lapped against the hull, but aside from that, all was silent. Then, just past midnight, the whispers returned. They were stronger now, more insistent. They weaved through the air like a gentle breeze, yet there was something chilling about them. The men gripped their lanterns tighter, scanning the shadows. Then came the sound of footsteps, light, deliberate, echoing across the deck. Elias turned sharply, his heart pounding. "Who goes there?" No answer. The footsteps stopped, just beyond the glow of the lanterns. A chill ran down his spine. Something was watching them, just beyond their reach. And deep within the ship's wooden frame, the whispers continued to call, waiting for their next victim. Night had settled fully over the ship, the moon casting a silver path across the restless sea. Emma stood on the deck, arms wrapped around herself, listening to the quiet sounds of the ocean. The whispers had faded for now, but their eerie presence lingered in her mind. Captain Harris had warned her. This was not something that could be ignored. She turned toward the dimly lit hallway leading below deck. A single lantern swung gently, its light creating shifting shadows along the wooden walls. Each step she took down the stairs creaked beneath her, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness surrounding the vessel. As she reached the lower corridor, a deep chill settled in her bones. The air was thick, damp, carrying the scent of salt and something more. Something stale, something old. The whispers might have stopped, but the ship still held secrets, waiting just beneath the surface. She hesitated outside the infirmary door. It was cracked open just enough for a sliver of darkness to spill into the hallway. Taking a steadying breath, she pushed it open further and stepped inside. The room was empty save for the few cots lined against the walls. Bottles and bandages rested on a small wooden table, the only sign of life in the otherwise still space. Then she saw it, a single wet footprint near the far end of the room. Her breath caught in her throat. The footprint led toward the storage cabinets, fading as if whoever had left it had simply vanished. The air pressed against her, heavy with something she couldn't name. A soft thump echoed from the far side of the room. Emma stiffened, her pulse quickening. She turned toward the sound, hands clenched at her sides. The cabinet doors rattled ever so slightly, as though something inside was shifting, waiting. She took a slow step forward, then another. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. The moment she touched it, a gust of cold air rushed past her, extinguishing the lantern light. Darkness swallowed the room. Emma stumbled back, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't soft. It wasn't distant. It was right there just beside her. She bolted from the room, her breath coming in quick gasps as she raced up the stairs and back onto the deck. The ship groaned beneath her feet, the waves lapping hungrily against its sides. She clutched the railing, staring out into the endless night. A hand settled on her shoulder. She spun around to find Captain Harris standing there, his expression unreadable. "They always try to call someone," he said quietly. "You must not answer." Emma swallowed hard, nodding. But deep down, she feared it was already too late. The ship swayed gently beneath Emma's feet as she stood near the bow, gripping the cold railing. The night air felt heavier now, charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. Captain Harris's warning echoed in her mind. She must not answer. But answer what? A deep rhythmic creaking came from below deck, as though the ship itself was breathing. Emma turned toward the entrance, leading to the lower corridors. The lanterns along the walls flickered, their flames shivering in an unseen draft. She hesitated, but curiosity pulled her forward. She needed to understand what was happening. As she descended, the familiar damp scent of seawater and aged wood thickened. Each step echoed, her presence the only discernible sound, until she heard it. A faint humming. A lullaby, distant yet unmistakable, drifting through the corridors. Emma followed the sound, her pulse quickening. It led her past the infirmary, past the storage rooms, to a door she hadn't noticed before. The metal handle was cold under her fingers as she turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber. A single porthole allowed the moonlight to seep in, illuminating a lone figure seated in the center. It was a man, or at least something that looked like one. His head was bowed, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His clothes were drenched, water pooling around him. Emma's breath hitched as he slowly lifted his head, revealing hollow, sunken eyes. "Why did you bring me back?" His voice was no louder than a whisper, yet it filled the space entirely. Emma's throat tightened. I don't understand." He tilted his head, considering her. "They called. And you listened." A wave of cold washed over her, as if the air had been sucked from the room. The walls groaned, the ship shuddering beneath her feet. The humming grew louder, surrounding her, pressing into her skull. Emma staggered back toward the door, heart pounding. She turned to run, but the moment her hand touched the doorknob, the man's voice cut through the thick air. "Don't leave me here." The words clung to her like mist, chilling her to the bone. With every ounce of strength, she yanked the door open and stumbled into the corridor. The moment she crossed the threshold, the humming stopped. Panting, she pressed herself against the wall, trying to calm her racing heart. The ship had fallen silent once more. But something told her she had woken something up. Something that would not be ignored. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed herself against the wooden wall of the corridor. The silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the humming had been. The ship rocked gently, the creaking timbers whispering secrets of the deep. She needed to find Captain Harris. He had known something important. Gathering her courage, she pushed away from the wall and hurried toward the upper deck. The lantern swayed, casting flickering shadows that seemed to stretch and shift as she passed. Her pulse pounded in her ears. As she reached the main deck, she found the captain standing at the helm, staring out at the dark horizon. His expression was grim, as though he had been expecting her. "You heard it, didn't you?" His voice was quiet, almost resigned. Emma nodded. "I saw him." Captain Harris turned to face her fully. "Then it has begun." A cold wind swept through the deck, carrying with it a distant sound. The haunting melody returning, softer this time, almost pleading. The captain closed his eyes briefly before stepping forward. "This ship carries echoes of the past, Emma. They call to those who will listen. Some answers should never be sought." Emma swallowed hard. But what does he want? Why is he here? The captain sighed, his gaze distant. He was lost to the sea long ago, taken before his time. When the ocean claims a soul, it does not always keep it. Some return, caught between the depths and the living world searching. Emma shuddered. She could still see the hollow eyes of the man in the room below deck, still hear the way his voice had wrapped around her like mist. "Can we help him?" The captain hesitated, then placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps. But some spirits cannot be set free. They linger until the sea calls them home again." As if in response, the ship groaned, a deep and mournful sound. The humming ceased, fading into the vast expanse of the waves. Emma felt an eerie stillness settle over them, as though something had finally come to rest. She exhaled slowly. Whatever had woken had returned to sleep, for now. The captain turned back to the sea, his voice barely above a whisper. "We sail at dawn." Emma stood beside him, gazing into the endless darkness, knowing that some mysteries were never meant to be unraveled. And yet, the echoes of the past would always remain, whispering in the waves, waiting for another to listen.